Welcome back to the second half of the February 26th lecture about American Empire. As we left off, American sentiment was getting whipped up over uh, rebellion in Cuba and what America's role should be in it. Ultimately, American journalists and business interests pushing the American people into supporting the Cubans in their desire for Western style freedom and democracy. Cuba Libre is the phrase of the day. The duty of the hour to save her not only from Spain, but from a worse fate. If we don't step in and remove the Spanish rule from Cuba, a worse revolution might take place, and anarchists or communist insurgents might step forward and destroy life as we know it on the Cuban Isle and destroy the Cuban people. So it is our job to pull Lady Cuba from the heat of rebellion. As I said before, ultimately all we really need is one excuse, and we'll go to war. That excuse will happen on the night of February 15th, 1898. The American battleship the Maine had been sent to Havana Harbor to be anchored there as a means of protecting American business interests. On the night of February 15th, 1898, the Maine exploded. There will be a congressional inquiry. They will try to raise the remains of the Maine in order to see what caused the explosion. As far as science goes in the 1890s, they will ultimately determine that they cannot determine or rule out that the Spanish did not detonate a mine or sabotage the Maine to cause it to blow up. What actually happened, as scientists in the late 20th century determined, there had been a fire in the coal bunker. Again, these are coal-burning ships. They use that material to generate energy to drive the ship through the seas. The coal bunker, however, coal catches on fire. It's actually not uncommon to have coal fires in ships as they are at sea. You can control them. You try to flood the coal compartment. You do what you can to try and put it out, but sometimes there's just nothing you can do, and you let it burn out. Unfortunately, the design of American battleships at this period, especially the class of which the Maine was, placed the ammunition bunker right next to the coal bunker. They shared a common wall. It has been theorized that the Maine blew up because the wall between the ammo bunker and the coal bunker got too hot and detonated the ordnance on board the Maine. That's our best guess scenario. We may never actually know what caused the explosion. All we know is it caused American sentiment to be outraged. Obviously, the Spanish had done this, and so we will see this as the final push towards war. The Spanish-American War will be fought in two continents at the same time. One continent will be very, very quick. One continent will be very, very slow. In the Philippines, we must have known something was going to happen if the American fleet was at sea and on the way to the Philippines or very close to the Philippines when we declared war. Commodore Dewey, the leader of the American Pacific Fleet, destroyed the entirety of the Spanish fleet in one battle in one day without a single American casualty, which sounds impressive until you realize the Spanish were still using out-of-date vessels, were caught unaware in port, and there was really no way that they could fight back. In Cuba, we will blockade the Spanish fleet with the American Atlantic Navy. Teddy Roosevelt will have his chance to win the Congressional Medal of Honor by leading his Rough Riders up San Juan Hill. He'll actually go up Kettle Hill and not San Juan Hill, but history will forgive you for making the mistake. Cuba will see 15 times more Americans die from mosquito-borne illnesses and waterborne illnesses than Spanish bullets. Puerto Rico will be taken without firing a shot. The same thing will happen with the capture of the island of Guam. One American naval cruiser will pull into port and demand its surrender, and the Spanish governor will say, sure. It's a very low casualty affair. It's the first major American military conflict overseas. It is the first American conflict since the Civil War. It is in essence, it is a feel-good war. Look how easily we destroyed the Spanish Empire. Look how easily we captured these territories and liberated their freedom-loving peoples. Well, we didn't liberate them, they just exchanged one ruling class for another. America will get new territories. It gains Puerto Rico as a territory. Guess what? It's still a territory. It will gain Cuba as a territory, Guam as a territory, which it still is, the Philippines as a territory, and a few other minor Pacific islands. It is, all in all, a splendid little war. Very few people die. We can feel good about ourselves, and we've kicked the ass of a dying empire. That American victory is going to set up the election of Theodore Roosevelt as vice president to William McKinley. McKinley had been president in 1898 during the war. Roosevelt had pushed loudly and publicly for the war against the Spanish, and had resigned his seat as the Assistant Secretary of the Navy in order to go off and fight in this war. He's a war hero. He is the one American we still to this day associate directly with the Spanish-American War. The Republicans will run Roosevelt as a vice presidential candidate in order to backseat him, bench him, so that he doesn't claim the presidency at a later time that might potentially hurt the hopes and chances of the Republican Party. So here we have the Republican Party proclaiming victory in America and overseas. Under Republicans, we have a thriving economy. We have thriving, beautiful farms and industry. People trust the banks, and we've freed Cuba. We have American rule in Cuba. The American flag has not been planted in foreign soil to acquire more territory, but for humanity's sake. It's a quote from William McKinley in 1900 at the end of the Spanish-American War. We will fight a Filipino insurgency well into the 20th century. We will deal with insurgents in Cuba and Puerto Rico, but that is for a later class. What we need to keep in mind is we now have American territories spreading American government to the world. As far as China goes, again, China is a civilization tens of thousands of years old. However, we, in coordination with Europe, had opened China we'd ended the Canton system. It used to be that all trade went through one port. The Europeans and Americans demanded that end in the 19th century. And what we see is spheres of influence within the borders of China, where Russia, Japan, Germany, England, Austria, France, the US, we all control sectors of coastal China. We extract resources from it. We sell our goods there. There's a very weak and corrupt Chinese government in place that really can't do anything to oppose us, nor do they really want to. Not for good reasons. It's for reasons of corruption and laziness and the end of a royal dynasty. We have Christian missionaries being sent into China, and what we see are popular movements start to rise up in the Chinese countryside that question how China is being treated by outsiders, by foreigners. Most notably, we have the Society of the Right and Harmonious Fists, also known as the Boxers, who oppose foreign control. Foreign missionaries, foreign businesses are running and ruining China. They are stripping it of its ancient heritage. And as such, the Boxers will attempt a rebellion to throw out the European and American influences. Most famously, this will culminate not only in the death of 48 missionaries and hundreds of Chinese Christian converts, but also we'll see this culminate in the siege of Peking for 55 days. Ultimately, the armed forces of several nations will help to lift this siege, including the United States Marine Corps. It'll make China's attempt at economic and social liberation moot, and it will actually help bring about the end, or begin the process of bringing about the end of the last Chinese dynasty in the next couple of decades. Foreign governments are going to demand compensation for their losses, and the 8 major nations will gain, they'll essentially control coastal China. They will have local rule, they will control trade. They essentially, the dynasty, the Qing dynasty, is a puppet government that has no power in areas of international control. We're also going to see the creation of an open door policy or free trade zones for interaction between all countries. That's going to fail massively because no one's going to want to have free trade. They're going to want to control trade for their own interests. And as I said, within 10 years, the Qing dynasty will fall and be replaced by the Republic of China. Not the People's Republic of China, the Republic of China. I've posted the war prayer under the links in this same section. Thank you very much for your patience today, and I'll see you on Thursday.